September 2001, Salem, Oregon. A quiet college town known for its tree-lined streets and small university community. But that fall, the town woke up to a story that would haunt it for decades. Emily Carter, 21 years old, was a junior at Willamette University. She studied fine arts, worked part-time at a cafe, and was preparing her first student exhibition. On the night of September 14th, she left the campus studio after a long day of painting. Security cameras captured her walking through the parking lot with her backpack and supplies. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Early the next morning, a jogger noticed her car parked near the Marion Street Bridge. The headlights were still on. The driver's side door was cracked open. Inside were her wallet, keys, and phone. Nothing was stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. Police rushed to the scene, fearing an accident. They searched the river below, convinced she may have slipped into the water during the heavy rainstorm that night. Divers combed the current for days. Nothing surfaced. Friends and family told investigators Emily was careful, responsible, and had no reason to walk out on her life. Rumors spread quickly across campus. Some whispered about a stalker. Others pointed to a heated argument she had with a professor earlier that week. By the end of September, the case was everywhere. Local headlines read, "College student vanishes after late-night class." Flyers with Emily's photo lined shop windows and telephone poles. Volunteers searched nearby woods and trails. Every lead came up empty. Police interviews revealed tension close to her. A boyfriend who couldn't prove his whereabouts for hours. A professor with a reputation for crossing boundaries. And a drifter spotted loitering near the Arc building in recent weeks. All became names in the investigation, but no arrests were made. For years, the car by the bridge remained the single haunting clue. A life interrupted in a matter of minutes. And for the town of Salem, the mystery of what happened to Emily Carter was only beginning. If you've stayed with the story so far, you know this is just the beginning. Emily Carter didn't simply vanish without leaving traces. In the next part, we'll go deeper into who she was, her life on campus, and the people closest to her. Those details would soon shape every theory and every suspicion. Stay with us. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of this case. Emily Carter was born in 1980 in Salem, Oregon. She came from a working-class family that valued effort and discipline. Her father worked long hours as a mechanic, and her mother spent most of her days at the local library. Emily grew up watching both of them balance responsibility with resilience, and it shaped the way she approached life. She was the second of 3 children, with an older sister Laura and a younger brother. Within the family, Emily often stepped into the role of helper. She cared for her younger sibling and supported her parents whenever she could. That sense of duty never left her, even as she got older and started building her own life. From an early age, Emily stood out for her artistic abilities. Teachers noticed that her notebooks were always filled with sketches. She entered small art competitions in Salem and brought home ribbons that her parents proudly displayed in their modest home. Her creativity was not just a hobby. It became a defining feature of who she was. That talent carried her to Willamette University. Emily earned a partial scholarship to study fine arts, a milestone her family celebrated as a victory. The scholarship did not cover everything, so Emily picked up extra shifts at a local coffee shop near campus. She balanced classes, late nights at the studio, and work behind the counter, rarely complaining. Friends recalled that even when exhausted, she carried herself with energy and a smile. Her professors and classmates described her as someone who stood out in a crowded room, not just for her art, but for her presence. She was outgoing, approachable, and never hesitated to speak her mind. If she believed something was unfair or wrong, Emily confronted it directly. One professor later admitted, Emily was the kind. At the time of her disappearance, Emily was in a relationship with Jacob Reed, a senior in software engineering. Their relationship was described as steady. Jacob was quiet and reserved, while Emily was lively and outspoken, but the balance seemed to work. Friends recalled seeing them at campus events and at the coffee shop where Emily worked. By all accounts, Jacob supported her art and encouraged her upcoming projects. That fall, Emily was preparing for what could have been a turning point in her career, her first solo exhibition at the university. She had spent months perfecting her canvases, often staying in the studio until late at night. For her, the show represented more than just a grade. It was proof that her years of sacrifice, her long hours at school, her late shifts at the cafe, were leading toward something meaningful. People close to Emily remembered her sense of anticipation. One classmate said, "She kept talking about the exhibition. She wanted everything to be perfect. We all thought it was going to be her big moment." That looming event only deepened the shock when she suddenly vanished. What makes Emily's story particularly haunting is how ordinary her life appeared in the days leading up to her disappearance. She wasn't hiding from anyone. She wasn't living recklessly. She was a young woman with a clear path, balancing school, work, family, and a relationship. There were no warning signs that suggested she was in danger. In the weeks before she went missing, Emily was often seen in her usual routine, serving customers at the cafe, painting in the studio, laughing with friends. She talked to her mother daily, kept in touch with her sister, and planned to visit her family soon. To everyone around her, she seemed stable and focused, excited for the future. Her dedication to her work and her sense of responsibility made her disappearance all the more disturbing. She wasn't the kind of person to vanish without a word. She wasn't careless with her safety, and she wasn't disconnected from the people around her. That image of a responsible, driven, and optimistic young woman stood in sharp contrast to the mystery that unfolded on the night of October 12, 2001. Emily Carter's life, as it was known, as investigators began piecing together her last known steps. The strong, steady portrait of Emily made one fact painfully clear. Something unusual and deliberate had happened that night. 10:45 p.m., October 12, 2001. The hallway outside the Willamette University studio is quiet. Fluorescents hum. A camera points at the exit door. Emily Carter steps out with her backpack and keys in hand. She pauses to lock up, checks the handle, then heads toward the lot. That frame is clear, time-stamped, and final. She does not appear rushed. She is alone. By 11 p.m., her silver sedan is seen in the riverfront park lot, a short drive from the studio. A student walking back from the library notices the car when passing the lot entrance. He later tells police he saw nothing unusual, no one with her, no raised voices, no struggle, just a parked car in a row of wet windshields. Rain arrives hard between 11:10 and 11:15. The streets thin out. Visibility drops. Headlights smear across the pavement. This weather matters. It covers sound. It blurs outlines. It shortens sightlines and scatters potential witnesses. Any motion from the lot to the riverbank could happen under a curtain of water. At 11:20 p.m., Emily sends one last text to a classmate. "Done. Heading back." The wording is plain. No mention of a detour. No request for help. After that, the phone goes quiet. There are no more messages, no calls, no data pings that night. Whatever happens to Emily happens fast, within minutes of that message. Morning breaks at 6:45 a.m. A city parks employee arrives to check trash bins and restrooms before the weekend crowd. He spots the sedan. The dome light is still on. The driver's door rests, half-latched, not fully closed. He looks inside and sees the backpack on the passenger seat, the phone in the cup holder, the wallet in the center console. He tries the door, realizes it is unlocked, and steps back. He calls it in. Outside the vehicle, the scene is clean. A few shallow shoe prints dot the concrete near the driver's side, but the rain has softened their edges. Tread patterns are faint and inconsistent. The technicians can't match them with confidence to Emily's shoes or to anyone else's. There is no obvious drag pattern, no dropped earring, no scuff on the bumper. The silence of the lot reads as if someone took great care not to leave a signature, or had the storm do that work for them. A K-9 team is called in. The handler presents a scent article taken from Emily's backpack. The dog tracks along the row of cars, circles the sedan twice, then lines out toward the riverside path. The trail pulls to a segment of bank screened by bushes where the soil turns to damp silt. The dog loses the thread there, circles, and sits. The handler marks the spot with a stake. Divers are requested. Searchers sweep the river over 2 days. They grid the area with boats and poles. They walk the shoreline in pairs. The current is steady but not severe. Depth varies near the bank. Visibility is poor after the storm, but not impossible. Nothing surfaces. No clothing, no shoe. No human remains. The absence complicates the accident theory, because bodies in this stretch tend to snag in predictable eddies or wash to known catch points downstream. Crews check those points. They find nothing. Detectives begin building a clock. The studio exit at 10:45 p.m. The car in the park by 11 o'clock. The text at 11:20. The weather turning at 11:10. They run the route from campus to the lot at normal speed and in rain conditions. It takes under 5 minutes. That suggests a gap. What did she do for nearly 15 minutes between parking and sending that text? Did she sit in the car to warm up? Did she check messages? Did someone approach her window? They canvass the park. A few overnight anglers report leaving before the rain hit. One says he saw a big pickup idling near the restroom around 10:55, lights on, wipers slapping. He cannot give a plate. A couple who walked their dog early says they often see the same drifter moving between. They subpoena phone records. Emily's handset used the nearest tower to the park from 11:18 to 11:20. There are no outgoing calls. The phone does not connect again overnight. With older networks, tower data is coarse. It tells them the device was in the sector facing the river. It does not place it within feet. The phone's presence in the car the next morning confirms it did not go into the water with her. They test the door latch. A half-closed position is consistent with someone exiting the car quickly, or someone pulling the door without seating it. Rain could help it drift, but not click shut. They examine the window seal for fibers and find none. The seatbelt is retracted. The mirror angle faces where Emily usually sets it according to Jacob Reed. That detail pushes back against a carjacking in motion. If someone drove the car after she vanished, They did not adjust much. By midday, a working theory splits into two tracks. Accident, she left the car, walked toward the river in the rain, slipped and went under. Foul play. Someone intercepted her at or near the lot, moved her by force, and left the scene clean. The first track strains at the lack of remains and the presence of valuables. The second strains at the lack of obvious marks. Detectives keep both on the board. They extend the canvas beyond the park. A bar back on Front Street remembers a man in a soaked flannel jacket coming in close to midnight, hands shaking as he asked for the restroom key. He stayed no more than 2 minutes, left no name, and headed south under the bridge. The description is thin, average height, scruffy beard, dark cap. The rain again is the enemy. It blurs memory as surely as it washed the lot. Friends and faculty are interviewed. A professor mentions tension in the art department that week over studio access after hours. A classmate says Emily was focused on her show and not the type to wander the park alone late. Jacob tells detectives he was in his dorm with his roommate, working on a software build. His timeline is checked against network logins and dorm entry records. Nothing contradicts him. By the end of the first week, the timeline is polished, but the center stays blank. A last text, a light left on. What remains at this stage is the clock. It does not lie. It is tight enough to exclude some theories and loose enough to tempt others. It tells us she left a safe, lit space and reached a public lot within minutes. It tells us she was planning to go home. It tells us the scene was carefully ordinary, with nothing stolen and nothing broken. And it forces one hard conclusion. If this was an accident, the river should have answered early. If this was a crime, someone used the rain like a door that only they could open and close. On the morning of October 13th, 2001, Salem police wasted no time. At sunrise, the Riverfront Park parking lot was sealed off with yellow tape. That was where Emily Carter's car had been discovered. Engine off, lights still glowing. Investigators knew immediately this was no ordinary case. Forensic teams moved in. They dusted the car, the door handles, and the steering wheel for prints. They collected strands of fabric and a few faint shoe impressions left on the wet concrete. But the heavy rain from the night before had washed away almost everything. The lot looked clean. Too clean. As if the storm had wiped away the answers. Divers from the Oregon State Police were called to search the Willamette River. They spent days combing through the water, using sonar equipment, dragging lines, and scanning the muddy riverbed. Nothing surfaced. No body, no clothes, not even a shoe. It was as though Emily had vanished into thin air. For a full week, Riverfront Park became a locked crime scene. Patrol cars guarded the entrances. Detectives searched every trail and bush along the riverbank. They walked the footpaths, flashlights in hand, scouring for any clue that might explain how a 21-year-old student could disappear only steps away from her parked car. Technology offered little help. In 2001, security cameras were sparse. The only usable footage came from Willamette University, showing Emily leaving the art studio at 10:45 p.m., carrying her backpack. Beyond that, there was nothing. No footage of her entering the lot. No camera. Inside the police station, detectives moved on to interviews. Friends described Emily as cheerful and grounded, with no enemies. Professors spoke well of her. But one recalled a heated argument between Emily and Professor Alan Brooks, a senior faculty member in the art department. The argument had been public, sharp, and left an impression on those who witnessed it. That detail ensured Brooks would not be overlooked. Attention also turned to Jacob Reed, Emily's boyfriend. Investigators knew that in missing persons cases, those closest to the victim often face the most scrutiny. Jacob was grilled for hours about his movements that night. He insisted he had been in his dorm room with a roommate and provided phone records to back up his claim. His story held up, but doubts in the community lingered. Another lead came from a park employee. He told police that in the days before Emily vanished, he had seen a strange man hanging around the parking lot. The man appeared several times, alone, pacing near the edges of the park, watching. The description was vague, but it added weight to growing fears that someone had been stalking the area. The pressure on police was relentless. The media ran daily updates. Headlines asked why investigators were clinging to the river accident theory when so many signs pointed to foul play. Salem residents grew restless, afraid to walk the park at night, whispering that a predator might be out there, watching for his next chance. Meanwhile, detectives kept grinding. They reviewed call logs, checked the few cameras in downtown Salem, and cross-examined witness statements. They revisited the car, hoping something had been missed. But there was no forced entry, no missing belongings, and no evidence of robbery. It looked as though someone had removed Emily from the scene without leaving a single mark behind. By late winter, the investigation was stalling. Hundreds of hours had been spent interviewing witnesses, chasing tips, and combing the park. But nothing led to a solid suspect. Leads fizzled. The man seen by the park employee was never identified. The argument with Professor Brooks proved inconclusive. Jacob's alibi stood firm. The early investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance had begun with urgency and community support. For a while, it felt like an answer was close. But months of searching, interrogating, and analyzing ended with nothing but frustration. Salem was left with a haunting reality. The trail had gone cold. The car was still there, the belongings intact, the family desperate for closure. But Emily herself had vanished, and no one could explain how. When Emily Carter vanished in October 2001, detectives had no body, no signs of a struggle, and no clear crime scene. That void left them with one path. Look closely at the people around her. Who had reason to hurt her? Who had the opportunity? And who left behind even the smallest trace? The first name was obvious, her boyfriend, Jacob Reed. In any missing person case, the partner is the first to be questioned. Jacob was 22, a senior studying software engineering at Willamette University. He had been dating Emily for nearly a year. Friends described their relationship as steady but not without tension. Detectives learned that only 2 weeks before Emily disappeared, the couple had argued outside a campus cafe. A witness recalled Jacob raising his voice, accusing Emily of spending too much time with her art professor, Alan Brooks. Emily pushed back, saying she was focused on preparing for her exhibition. It wasn't violent, but it was heated. That single moment was enough for police to dig deeper. Jacob was brought in for questioning the very morning Emily's car was found. Investigators pressed him. Where were you between 10 at night and midnight? Who could confirm your whereabouts? Jacob insisted he was in his dorm room working on a project with his roommate. His alibi checked out. The roommate gave a consistent statement, and digital records from the dorm's Wi-Fi confirmed activity from Jacob's laptop. Still, police kept him in the hot seat. They asked about the fight, about Emily's schedule, about whether he felt she was drifting away. Jacob admitted they argued sometimes, but said he loved her and would never hurt her. Despite his solid alibi, suspicion lingered. Then there was Professor Alan Brooks. Brooks was 50 years old, a veteran art instructor with a reputation for being demanding and temperamental. He had clashed with Emily weeks before her disappearance. The argument happened during a late afternoon critique session. Emily had been preparing pieces for her exhibition, and Brooks harshly criticized her work, calling it undisciplined and lacking direction. Emily, known for speaking her mind, didn't back down. Other students recalled her raising her voice, telling Brooks she didn't need him to define her art. The confrontation became a topic of campus gossip. Whispers soon followed. Brooks had shown too much attention to female students in the past. Nothing had ever been proven, but rumors were enough to fuel suspicion. Detectives interviewed him multiple times. Brooks denied any inappropriate behavior, denied holding grudges, and insisted he respected Emily's talent. But when asked where he had been the night she vanished, his alibi was thin. He claimed he was home grading papers, alone. No witnesses, no records. The press seized on the story. Headlines hinted at scandal, painting Brooks as a frustrated professor who might have crossed the line. His colleagues noticed students avoiding his classes. The university received complaints from parents. Even without evidence, his career began to crumble. The third figure was different. Brian Keller was not part of the university. He was a drifter, often seen loitering around Riverfront Park and the edges of campus. In his early 30s, with a disheveled appearance and a reputation for erratic behavior, Keller stood out. Park employees remembered him sleeping on benches or muttering to himself. But there was more. Months before Emily disappeared, she told a co-worker at the cafe about a man who kept watching her from outside. She said he had even slipped a handwritten note under her car windshield, calling her his muse, and signing it simply B. That co-worker later identified the handwriting as similar to Keller's. Police brought Keller in for questioning. He admitted seeing Emily around campus and said he admired her art. He insisted he meant no harm. The second theory was that Emily left voluntarily. Rumors circulated that she had been under pressure, balancing school, work, and the demands of her upcoming exhibition. Some speculated she wanted to escape, but those closest to her dismissed the idea. She had plans, commitments, and excitement for her future. Leaving without a word made no sense. With no answers, Salem turned inward. The town divided. Some pointed to Jacob, convinced the boyfriend always hides something. Others whispered about Brooks, the professor with a temper and no alibi. Still others feared Keller, the unstable drifter with strange obsessions. Conversations at cafes, classrooms, and dinner tables revolved around these three names. The case became a breeding ground for theories, each one louder than the last. The media fueled the frenzy. Headlines read, "The Troubled Boyfriend," "The Angry Professor," and "The Lurking Stranger." Reporters demanded to know why police hadn't made an arrest. Talk shows debated which suspect seemed most guilty. The lack of progress only deepened the divisions. For detectives, it was maddening. Each suspect had a potential motive. Each had gaps in their stories. But none could be tied directly to Emily's disappearance. The evidence wasn't there. The arguments, the rumors, the sightings, they all painted shadows, but never a solid picture. As weeks turned into months, the case began to cool. Leads dried up. Witnesses repeated the same accounts. The community's outrage shifted into resignation. The file remained open, but progress stalled. By early 2002, investigators had spent hundreds of hours chasing tips, interviewing witnesses, and revisiting suspects. Yet the central question remained: where was Emily Carter? For Jacob Reed, the suspicion never fully faded. For Alan Brooks, the whispers ended his career. For Brian Keller, his name stayed in the margins of the case file, waiting. And for the city of Salem, the lack of resolution became its own torment. Everyone had a theory, but the truth stayed buried. In the fall of 2002, the investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance went quiet. Despite that, the Carters refused to let the city forget. Every October, they stood at Riverfront Park with candles in hand, photos of Emily pinned to posters, and their voices carrying into the night. The family asked for tips, begged anonymous witnesses to speak out, pleaded with the community not to let Emily's name fade. In the early years, hundreds gathered. Over time, the crowd grew smaller. By the 5th anniversary, it was mostly close friends and a handful of strangers who felt compelled to be there. Jacob Reed, Emily's boyfriend, left Salem in 2003. He moved to California, telling only a few people where he was going. He lived quietly, taking contract jobs in the software industry, avoiding media requests, refusing interviews. Whenever the police called, he still answered. He never cut ties with the case, but he also never tried to put himself back into the spotlight. The suspicion that had once clung to him followed him like a shadow, even though he had an alibi that held up under scrutiny. Professor Alan Brooks carried his own kind of burden. The argument he'd had with Emily in the weeks before her disappearance became a point of gossip on campus. Students whispered about it. Reporters printed it. When rumors surfaced about inappropriate behavior toward female students, Brooks's name was dragged through the mud. There was never any evidence tying him to Emily's disappearance, but the cloud of suspicion never left. By 2005, the stress and the scrutiny pushed him into early retirement. Once respected, he slipped into near isolation, his career cut short by a case he had nothing to do with. And then there was Brian Keller, the drifter, the man who hung around the university, the figure that many students remembered as creepy. He was arrested multiple times between 2003 and 2006 for harassment, for trespassing, for petty theft. Each time he was released after serving short sentences or paying fines. None of the arrests tied him to Emily. There was no physical evidence, no direct link. Without it, the police could do nothing. By 2005, the name Emily Carter began to circulate again, not in headlines. Those reviews rarely produced anything useful. Detectives would pull out the file, compare notes, look at transcripts, and check if any new witnesses had come forward. Most of the time, the results were the same: dead ends. Anonymous tips about a woman who looked like Emily in Portland or Seattle, hearsay about strangers in the park, but when followed up, none of it led anywhere. By 2008, DNA technology had made leaps forward. Cold case units across the country were re-examining old evidence. Families of missing persons hoped this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The Carters felt the same. But in Salem there was a barrier: money. The police didn't have the budget to send every piece of evidence from old cases through advanced testing. Emily's file, like so many others, sat in storage, the small bag of evidence inside preserved but untouched. In 2010, the blow came. Officially, Emily Carter's disappearance was classified as unsolvable. It didn't mean police stopped caring, but on paper it meant they had no viable leads left to pursue. For the Carters, it was a knife to the heart. They refused to accept it. Every year they sent petitions, letters, requests to reopen the case. They met with detectives, begged politicians, sought out reporters. Each time the answer was polite but final. Without new evidence, nothing could be done. The following years carried rumors more than facts. Between 2012 and 2016, people occasionally called tip lines saying they'd seen a woman who looked like Emily in Seattle or Portland. The tips led nowhere. By the time detectives checked cameras or interviewed supposed witnesses, weeks had passed. Nothing matched. The sightings were either mistakes or hoaxes. Each false lead deepened the family's exhaustion. Even so, Emily's memory never completely faded from Salem. At Willamette University, faculty and students kept her name alive. In 2017, on the 15th anniversary of her disappearance, the campus held a vigil. Professors spoke about safety, students walked with candles, and a small memorial was placed near the art building where Emily had last been seen. By 2021, everything changed. The state of Oregon created a dedicated cold case unit designed to review long-standing unsolved crimes. Emily Carter's name was placed near the top of the list. It had been 20 years since she disappeared, but the evidence was still intact. The box that had sat for decades in storage would finally be reopened. For the Carters, it was the first real sign of hope in years. The cold years were marked by silence, dead ends, and fading public interest. But they were also marked by persistence. A family that never stopped pushing. A university that refused to let the memory of one of its students vanish. And a case that sat waiting, evidence sealed in bags, biding its time until technology, resources, and determination would finally collide. That collision was about to happen. If you followed the story this far, you can see how 2 decades of silence nearly buried Emily's case forever. But what happened next would finally crack it open. We'll look at the breakthrough that changed everything. A single piece of evidence, long overlooked, that brought detectives back to the truth. Don't miss it. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know your theory before the next chapter drops. In 2022, more than 2 decades had passed since Emily Carter vanished on that rainy night in Salem. For years, the case sat in a file drawer labeled Unsolved. Families moved on, detectives retired, and the city slowly stopped talking about it. But Oregon had just created a statewide cold case unit. Their mission was simple: reopen the oldest, hardest files and give families the answers they had been denied. Emily Carter's name was one of the first to land on their desk. Detective Sofia Martinez, just 33 years old, was assigned the case. She was part of a younger generation of investigators who had grown up watching stories like Emily's play out in the media. For her, this was more than paperwork. She knew she was holding 20 years of unanswered questions in her hands. Martinez began with the original evidence box. Dust covered the lid. Inside were the items collected in October 2001. Photographs of Emily's car, the clothes she had been wearing earlier that evening, reports from search teams, and pages of interviews with witnesses and family members. Most of it had been reviewed countless times before, But Martinez had a reputation for catching details others ignored. One afternoon, as she sorted through envelopes and evidence bags, she noticed something almost forgotten. A single hair strand taped inside a small plastic sleeve. The label read, "Recovered from vehicle, driver's side." Back in 2001, DNA analysis was limited and expensive. Investigators had preserved the sample but never tested it. To Martinez, this wasn't just an old hair. It was an opportunity. She sent it immediately to the state lab, requesting full DNA sequencing with the most advanced technology available. Weeks later, the results came back. The strand did not belong to Emily Carter. It did not belong to Jacob Reed, her boyfriend. Instead, it matched a name that had appeared briefly in early reports but never stuck: Brian Keller. Keller had been mentioned in passing by park staff as a man who loitered near Riverfront Park around the time Emily disappeared. He was a transient figure, a drifter known for erratic behavior. Police had questioned him years earlier but found no reason to pursue him further. Without evidence, his name faded into the background. Now, in 2022, the hair from Emily's car tied him directly to the scene. And Keller wasn't just anywhere. At that very moment, he was sitting in a Washington state prison, serving time for assaulting another young woman. The link was impossible to ignore. Martinez arranged for a formal interview. Keller was brought into a small interrogation room, shackled, his beard long and unkempt, his eyes darting across the table. When confronted with the DNA match, he smirked. He claimed the hair must have come from a harmless encounter. According to him, he had met Emily once at the cafe where she worked. Maybe he leaned into her car to say hello. That was all, he said. The explanation didn't sit right. Martinez pushed further. She asked for a search warrant on Keller's old storage unit, a cluttered space he had rented years earlier and never reclaimed. Officers pried open the door. Inside were boxes of worn clothes, broken radios, and random trinkets. At first glance, it looked like junk. But buried in one of the boxes was something that stopped everyone cold. It was a silver bracelet. The name Emily was etched into the band. The Carter family later confirmed it had been a gift from Emily's mother in 1999, a piece of jewelry Emily wore often and never removed. The bracelet was the missing link. It proved Keller hadn't just brushed past Emily at a cafe. He had taken something deeply personal from her, and it placed him directly in her life, connected to her disappearance. News of the discovery spread quickly. Local media called it the golden clue that finally cracked the case. For years, reporters had speculated, debated, and even accused the wrong people. Now there was physical evidence that pointed to a suspect who had slipped through the cracks. The Carter family was notified first. After decades of silence, they heard the words they had longed for. There was new evidence, and it was strong. For Richard and Susan Carter, Emily's parents, it was both a relief and a heartbreak. They had waited more than 2 decades to hear her name connected to real answers. Back in Salem, the announcement reignited interest. Old headlines were republished. TV stations aired specials. People who had merely forgotten Emily's story now remembered the fear and confusion of that October night in 2001. The discovery also raised new questions. How had investigators overlooked Keller for so long? Why had a key piece of evidence sat untested in a box for 21 years? Detective Martinez knew the fight wasn't over. DNA and the bracelet were powerful, but they needed a full case to bring Keller to trial. She combed through Keller's history, tracking his movements in 2001, comparing them to police reports. Witnesses who had once described a strange man near the parking lot were re-interviewed. Their memories were faded, but consistent. A heavy-set man with a scruffy beard who lingered around the park late at night. Each detail added weight to the file. The DNA was undeniable. The bracelet was irrefutable. Combined with Keller's history of violence, the pieces finally aligned. By early 2023, prosecutors were confident enough to proceed. An arrest warrant was issued, and Keller was officially charged with first-degree murder. His name, once buried in rumor, now stood at the center of a case Salem had carried for 2 decades. The turning point was more than just science. It was persistence. A detective who refused to treat an old case as a dead end had spotted a strand of hair and asked the right questions. That single decision cracked open the silence that had surrounded Emily Carter's disappearance. In March 2023, after more than 2 decades of silence, the Oregon State Police moved forward with a decision that the Carter family had been waiting for. They issued a warrant for the arrest of Brian Keller, the drifter who had hovered on the edges of the investigation since 2001. Keller had been questioned years earlier, suspected but never charged. This time, things were different. Detectives had hard evidence in their hands. A single hair recovered from Emily's car. A silver bracelet engraved with her name. Both pointed directly to Keller. The press conference announcing his arrest drew reporters from across the state. Investigators described the DNA results and the recovered bracelet as decisive. For 22 years, the case had seemed impossible to solve. Now, the evidence was no longer just circumstantial. It was concrete, tested, and undeniable. The community of Salem, long resigned to an unsolved tragedy, felt a jolt of shock and anticipation. Cameras captured every moment as police led Keller in shackles, head bowed, refusing to meet the eyes of the flashing press. His face was stone, his silence heavy. That image ran across every evening newscast in Oregon that night. At the Salem Police Department, the first interrogation began. Investigators laid out the evidence in front of him. Photographs of the bracelet, the DNA report, and the connection to Emily's car. Keller remained calm, leaning back in his chair, and denied everything. He claimed he had purchased the bracelet years ago at a flea market, a cheap trinket he liked to keep. He called the DNA results a coincidence, nothing more than bad luck. His words sounded rehearsed, but the investigators knew time would work against him. The detectives pressed harder. They showed him the official property log documenting the bracelet found in his old storage trunk nestled among personal belongings only he had access to. His story cracked almost immediately. Keller shifted, avoided eye contact, and demanded a lawyer. But the detectives weren't finished. Over the next several days, the interrogation continued in cycles. Keller adjusted his story again and again. At first, he claimed he had never met Emily. Later, The turning point came when prosecutors introduced testimony from a retired park employee. He had come forward years earlier, reporting he'd seen a strange man hanging around the parking area days before Emily vanished. At the time, the lead had been noted but not developed. Now, with Keller back in the spotlight, detectives matched the man's description against old mugshots. The identification was immediate. The witness confirmed under oath the man he saw in 2001 was Brian Keller. That detail, combined with the scent trail picked up by dogs near the river back then, aligned perfectly with the theory that Keller had confronted Emily as she returned to her car on the rainy night of October 12th. The pressure on Keller mounted. Hours of questioning stretched late into the night. He sat in a small, sterile room, confronted by detectives who refused to let inconsistencies slide. Keller grew irritable, snapping at small questions, his voice breaking when asked about the bracelet. By the 5th day of interrogation, his defenses collapsed. When he finally spoke, the confession came in fragments. He admitted he had been at the park that night. He had watched Emily walk alone toward her car. He described the heavy rain, how it masked his footsteps. He told detectives he approached her, at first only to talk, but panic set in when she resisted. He grabbed her, forced her into his truck, and drove out of Salem. What followed was a chaotic act of violence. Keller claimed he had not planned to kill her, but admitted he did when she tried to escape. His words were chilling, matter-of-fact, as though recounting something inevitable. He confessed to disposing of her body in an abandoned mining site near Mount Hood, nearly 70 miles away. He had chosen the spot because it was remote, overgrown, and forgotten by most. He was confident no one would ever look there. Investigators wasted no time. A forensic team was dispatched to the site Keller described. Days of digging revealed human remains buried deep in the dirt, along with scraps of fabric consistent with clothing Emily had been wearing the night she disappeared. DNA testing confirmed the truth. After 22 years, Emily Carter had been found. The discovery was devastating. In the spring of 2023, Brian Keller was convicted of first-degree murder. The judge handed down a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Keller showed little reaction as the sentence was read. He sat expressionless, eyes down, the same way he had been led into court weeks earlier. For the Carter family, the verdict brought both relief and pain. They had answers, but those answers confirmed the worst possible truth. They had fought for justice for over 2 decades, and finally, justice had come. Yet no conviction could erase the years of waiting, the endless vigils, the fear, the uncertainty. Emily's absence remained. For the city of Salem, the resolution of the case was a shockwave. Many had long believed the truth would never come. Others had spent years speculating, pointing fingers at Emily's boyfriend, at her professor, at anyone who might have had motive. Now, with the verdict final, the blame was put to rest. The tragedy had been solved, not through rumor or speculation, but through persistence, science, and evidence that technology had finally been able to unlock. The arrest, confession, and conviction of Brian Keller closed the darkest chapter in Salem's recent history. But it also stood as a reminder of the importance of never giving up on unanswered questions. A single strand of hair, a bracelet left behind. 2 pieces of evidence that, when technology caught up, broke a case wide open. In the end, Keller was locked away forever, his freedom gone, just as he had stolen Emily's. For her family, for the community, the trial offered a kind of closure. Not healing, not comfort, but closure. The story of Emily Carter, the art student who vanished on a rainy night in 2001, had reached its tragic conclusion in the courtroom of 2023. Spring of 2023 brought closure, but also pain. After 22 years, Emily Carter's remains were released to her family. The city of Salem organized a funeral at Riverfront Park, the same place where her car was found in 2001. A granite marker was set at the riverfront parking lot, just steps from where Emily's car had been discovered with its headlights still burning in the rain. The words were simple. In memory of Emily Carter, never forgotten. Below the line was a small QR code linking to case updates, safety resources, and donation portals for the scholarship fund. People who walked by could scan it, read her story, and contribute to making sure another student would not vanish unnoticed. The physical stone and the digital link fused past and present together, ensuring her name would never fade again. The Salem Police Department also issued a long-awaited after-action report. For the first time, officials admitted missed leads and lost opportunities from 2001 and 2002. They acknowledged that evidence had been overlooked. They confirmed that routine follow-ups were not completed, and they laid out reforms. Every long-running investigation would undergo mandatory secondary evidence audits, and each year, the department would select a sample of cold cases for retesting with new tools. It was an admission of failure, but also a commitment to doing better. The Oregon Cold Case Unit was given more strength. Staffing doubled from 6 detectives to 12, with a dedicated budget for DNA reanalysis. The unit launched a statewide initiative to retest hair and fiber evidence from cases between 1990 and 2010. Thousands of items sat in boxes that had never seen next-generation DNA methods. Now, each one was on the list. Emily's case became the model. An overlooked hair, a forgotten trace, a second look that turned everything around. The State Attorney General's office also responded. It issued new standards for how evidence must be stored. Every box of physical items from unsolved crimes had to be barcoded. Temperature and humidity had to be logged. Chain of custody needed digitization so that prosecutors and defense could both access reliable inventories under court supervision. No more lost or degraded evidence. The Carter case had shown that one overlooked detail could decide whether a family spent decades waiting in the dark, or finally heard the truth. At work, the media too was forced to confront its role. 2 local outlets published formal editorials acknowledging their earlier mistakes. Back in 2001, they had leaned heavily on speculation, printing stories that hinted Jacob Reed and Professor Alan Brooks were involved. Both men's reputations suffered. Now, Salem PD issued written statements clearing their names, and Brooks pursued a civil settlement for reputational damage. The settlement could not restore his career, but it was a recognition that words had weight, and misreporting could ruin lives. Emily's sister, Laura Carter, turned her grief into advocacy. She co-founded an organization called Project Riverlight. Its goal was to support families in the early days of disappearance cases, when resources were thin and delays could be costly. Project Riverlight gave out micro-grants for missing persons posters, tip-line rewards, and access to trauma-informed counseling for families left waiting for identifications. Laura said, "We waited too long. No family should face that silence." The project quickly spread across Oregon, giving small but vital help to families caught in the first frantic weeks. The legislative impact reached the state capitol. Lawmakers drafted and passed the Oregon Evidence Integrity Act. The bill mandated periodic reviews of funding for cold case laboratories. It required statewide CODIS hit notifications to be sent to originating agencies without delay. It also streamlined warrants for storage unit searches, avoiding the months of paperwork that once slowed investigations. The law was clear. Never again should a family wait 20 years because a single hair sat untested in a box. The ripple effects were immediate. Within a year of Keller's conviction, 3 other unsolved cases were reopened using the same model. DNA reanalysis, cold case audits, and community tip reviews. One of those cases produced a CODIS match from a fiber collected in 1994. Another led to new charges against a suspect long considered untouchable. These victories reinforced the lesson that Emily's story had taught. Justice delayed could still be justice delivered. In Salem, the community kept. For the Carter family, the answers were bittersweet. Richard and Susan Carter had lived 2 decades not knowing. They had seen their daughter's name printed in headlines, turned into whispers, and debated in forums. They had endured false suspicions against people Emily had loved and trusted. But in the end, they buried her with dignity. Susan said, "We waited too long, but we never gave up." Their words carried across the park, reminding everyone of the endurance of a family's fight. The impact of the case was larger than any single arrest or conviction. It reshaped how Salem police handled evidence. It changed how Oregon funded cold case investigations. It forced media outlets to acknowledge their responsibility. It inspired campus reforms that made Willamette a safer place for students who walked home at night. It even influenced state law, ensuring the mistakes of 2001 would not be repeated in the future. The legacy of Emily Carter was not only in the scholarship that bore her name or the plaque that marked the parking lot. It was in the practical changes that followed. Families waiting in silence now had more hope. Police officers had stronger tools and clearer rules. Students had safer spaces. And lawmakers had proof that cold case reform was not abstract. It was personal, urgent, and overdue. Today, when people pass by Riverfront Park, they see more than a memorial stone. They see a reminder that evidence matters, that persistence matters, and that every overlooked detail deserves another look. Emily's name, etched in granite, stands not only for what was lost, but for what was gained. A shift in how a city, a state, and a justice system faced the mistakes of the past. If stories like Emily's matter to you, if you believe no victim should be forgotten and no case should be left behind, support this channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with others. Your interaction helps keep these stories alive, helps push awareness further, and ensures that justice delayed will never mean justice denied.